I'm 81 and I forget the sound of my own voice. I found a voicemail on an old phone last week. My daughter was helping me clean out the spare room, the one that used to be Thomas's before he left for college and never really came back to life, the way children don't. She found the phone in a shoebox, one of those old flip phones, the kind with the scratched silver casing. She charged it up just to see if it still worked, and it did. And there was one saved voicemail on it. It was me, from 2009. My own voice, leaving myself a reminder about a dentist appointment. I stood there in that room, and I listened to it 3 times. Not because of what I was saying, but because of how I sounded. I didn't recognize it at first. I genuinely did not know whose voice that was. It was lower than I remember, steadier. There was something in it, a kind of certainty, I suppose, that I don't hear in myself anymore when I speak. I've been thinking about that ever since, about all the ways a person can lose themselves so quietly that they don't even notice it happening. I say that plainly because it is plain. It happened. Thomas is gone. Gerald is gone. And I am still here, which some days feels like a gift and some days feels like something else entirely. I don't say any of this for sympathy. I say it because I think you need to know who is talking to you. I've earned whatever I'm about to say, not because I'm wise, but because I've lived long enough to see how things actually turned out. That's different from wisdom. That's just time. I don't know exactly when I stopped sounding like myself. I think it happened in pieces. Small surrenders, one after another, over so many years that I never noticed any single one of them. Gerald was a quiet man, not cold. I want to be careful about that, but quiet in the way that some men of his generation were. He showed love through action. He fixed things. He drove me to every appointment I ever had without being asked. He would put a cup of tea on the counter beside me without saying a word, just because he'd noticed I looked tired. That was how he spoke. But he was not a man who talked about feelings. And I was not a woman back then who insisted on it. We met in 1971. I was 28. He was 31. We married the following year, because that was simply what you did. You met someone suitable and you built a life together, and the building of it was the relationship. You didn't stop to examine it. There wasn't time. There were children to raise, and bills to manage, and meals to get on the table, and then suddenly it was 1989, and the children were teenagers, and I couldn't remember the last time Gerald and I had talked about anything except logistics. I remember one evening, this must have been around 1991 or so, I was standing at the kitchen sink after dinner, and I had this thought. It came out of nowhere. I thought, I have no idea what I actually think about anything. Not about the world. Not about Gerald. Not about my own life. I had spent so long managing, adapting, smoothing things over, keeping everyone comfortable, that somewhere in all of that, my own internal voice had just gotten quieter and quieter until I couldn't quite make it out anymore. I didn't do anything with that thought. I washed the dishes and went to watch the news with Gerald, and that was the end of it. But I've never fully forgotten it either. There was a woman I worked with named Diane. We were at the same firm for 11 years. She was the kind of person who said exactly what she thought, not unkindly, but without apology. If she disagreed with something, she said so. If she was proud of something, she said that too. She didn't perform modesty the way I had learned to. I used to watch her sometimes and feel something I couldn't name back then. I can name it now. It was longing. I wanted to be that unguarded. I just didn't know how to get there. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever really tried. I told myself she was different, that some people were just made that way, that I wasn't the type. But that wasn't entirely true, was it? I had been the type once, when I was very young, before I learned to make myself smaller in rooms where smallness seemed to be required. I remember being 12 years old, standing in the schoolyard, arguing with a boy twice my size about whether something was fair.
I wasn't afraid of him.
I wasn't afraid of anything. I remember the feeling of standing my ground and knowing I was right and not backing down. I remember it because it's so far from who I became. I don't know exactly what happened between 12 and 28. Life, I suppose. My mother, who was a good woman but not a confident one. The particular way the world spoke to girls in the 1950s. The accumulation of small corrections. Don't be so loud. Don't be so sure of yourself. Don't take up so much space. I learned the lesson very well. Gerald and I had one real argument in 44 years of marriage. I mean, a real one. Not bickering over the thermostat or whose turn it was to call the plumber. I mean an argument where something true was finally said out loud. It was 2003. Thomas was 31. Our daughter Carol was visiting with her husband and the grandchildren, and after they left, Gerald said something I can't even remember exactly what it was, now something dismissive about a decision I had made about Christmas plans. Something that implied, without quite saying it, that my opinion on the matter hadn't really been taken into account. And I turned around from the window and I said, very quietly, Gerald, I have been arranging my life around your preferences for 30 years. I would like, just once, to be asked what I want. The room went so still. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, I didn't know you felt that way. And that was the thing. That was the whole thing right there. He genuinely didn't know, because I had never told him. I had accommodated and adjusted and swallowed things down for so long that he had simply assumed I was satisfied. I had performed satisfaction so thoroughly that it had become invisible, even to the person closest to me in the world. We talked that night for 4 hours. Longer than we had talked in years, maybe ever. I cried. He cried, which I had never seen before, and it undid me completely. We said things that were long overdue, not cruel things, just honest ones. And then life went back to normal, as it does. We were better after that, I think. Something had shifted. He would ask me things more, small things, but deliberately, and I tried to answer honestly, instead of just saying what would be easiest. But he died 6 years later, and I have thought many times about those 6 years, how they were different, how I wish there had been more of them. And I have thought, more painfully, about the 30 years before that night at the window. All those years when I was so intent on keeping everything smooth and easy that I disappeared from my own marriage without quite meaning to. He didn't cause that. I want to be clear about that. Gerald was not a bad man. He was a man of his time, imperfect the way all of us are, but genuinely loving in the way he knew how to be. What happened was something I did to myself, something I allowed, something I participated in without understanding until too late what it was costing me. After Gerald died, I had a strange few years. Strange in that I didn't quite know who I was anymore, without the structure of the marriage. I had oriented my days around another person for so long that when that person was gone, I didn't know where to point myself. I took a watercolor class. I don't know why. I had never painted anything in my life. The instructor was a young woman, very patient, and she would come around and look at what you'd done and say something specific and kind about it. Every single time. I was not good at it. I'm still not good at it. But I went every Tuesday morning for 2 years, and I sat in that room with other people who were learning something new, and something happened there that I didn't expect. I started talking more. Not about big things, just in conversation. I started saying what I actually thought, noticing I had opinions about things, and then, instead of swallowing them, actually offering them out loud. Small things at first. What color I thought worked, what I liked about someone's painting, what I found difficult about my own. One of the women in the class, her name was Betta. She said to me once, "Ruth, you have a wonderful way of seeing things. You should say it more." I was 72 years old when a woman in a watercolor class told me I should speak more. 72. I went home that afternoon, and I sat in this same chair and I thought about Diane at the office all those years ago, about the longing I had felt watching her, about 12-year-old me in the schoolyard, unafraid, about the window in 2003 and Gerald's face when I finally said something true. It was like watching a trail of breadcrumbs I had dropped across my own life and never noticed until I was standing at the far end of it, looking back. I'm not sure I can explain what it feels like to realize you've been quiet for most of your life. It isn't grief, exactly. It's more like you know when you've been wearing shoes that are slightly too small for years, and then one day you take them off, and your feet ache, and you realize you had stopped noticing how much they hurt because you'd gotten so used to it. It's something like that. Except the shoes were habits. Patterns of self-erasure I had put on so long ago, I had forgotten they weren't simply how I was built. I had a voice. I'd always had a voice. I just kept it at such a low volume that even I couldn't always hear it. And the thing I find hardest to sit with, the part that still keeps me up some nights, is that no one forced me to do that. There were pressures, yes. There were expectations, the way there always are. But I had choices, too. Moments where I could have said something and didn't. Moments where I could have held my ground and chose instead to let it go. So many small elections, across so many years, all voting for the same thing. Silence. My granddaughter's name is Nora. She's 26. She is nothing like I was at 26. She says what she thinks. She is studying something to do with environmental policy, something I don't fully understand, but she explains it with such passion that I don't need to understand it to feel it. She argues with people online. I know, though I don't fully know what that means or how it works. She calls me sometimes just to talk, not on Sundays, the way her mother does, but at random hours when something is on her mind. She's the one who set up this recorder. Last month she came to visit, and she sat across from me at this table and she said, "Grandma, do you have regrets?" Just like that. No softening of it. Just the question. Plain. I looked at her for a long moment, and I thought about all the times in my life I had been asked a question and had reached, automatically, for the comfortable answer. The manageable one. The one that wouldn't make anyone worry or wonder or feel responsible. And then I told her the truth. I said yes. I regret how long I spent being afraid to take up space. She was quiet. Then she said, "Tell me more." So I did. We sat at this table for 3 hours, and I told her things I had never said out loud. About the window in 2003. About Diane. About that voicemail I heard myself in and didn't recognize. About the watercolor class, and what Betta said, and what it felt like to be told at 72 that I should speak more. She cried a little. I didn't, which surprised me. Maybe because I had already grieved most of it, slowly, quietly, over the years. Or maybe because just the act of saying it out loud had taken the weight off it somewhat. When she left that afternoon, she hugged me for a long time at the door. She said, "I'm glad you told me." And then, very quietly, she said, "I wish you had gotten more time." I think about that, what she meant by it. She meant more time after the window. More time being the version of me that finally started saying things honestly. More time in the watercolor room. More years of whatever shift had begun to happen in me once I was alone and had to figure out who I was without the shape of another life to fit myself around. She was right. I wish I'd had more time too. But wishing is not the same as having, and here I am. 81. Curtains open at 4 in the morning, which is itself something, that she wanted to hear it. That I'm saying it. I think the honest truth is that I don't know how much of my silence was fear and how much was love. Because some of it was love. I kept quiet sometimes because I genuinely didn't want to hurt Gerald. I swallowed things sometimes because I genuinely wanted peace more than I wanted to be right. Those weren't entirely wrong instincts. There is value in generosity. There is value in keeping a family together, in choosing your battles, in understanding that not every feeling needs to be spoken out loud. But I crossed a line somewhere, from generosity into erasure. And the crossing happened so gradually, over so many years, that I didn't see the line until I was well past it. That's the part I sit with. Not the individual moments, but the accumulation of them. The compound effect of 10,000 small silences. The way a life can narrow without your ever deciding to narrow it. There are things I would say now that I never said. I would tell Gerald earlier what I needed. Not in accusation, just in honesty. I would say, I need you to ask me things. I need to feel like what I think matters here. I think he would have listened. He listened in 2003. There's no reason to believe he wouldn't have listened in 1983 if I had found a way to say it. I would have called Thomas more, just to hear his voice. Not about anything in particular. I would have let the conversations be smaller and more frequent instead of saving them for occasions. I would have started the watercolor class 30 years earlier. Not because of the painting, because of the room, because of what happened to me inside of a space where I was allowed to be a beginner and say what I saw and have someone respond to it. I would have answered more honestly when people asked how I was. That one sounds small. It isn't. How are you? Fine, thanks. 40 years of that exchange. 40 years of swallowing the actual answer and replacing it with the expected one. I don't know what it would have changed. Maybe nothing. Maybe a great deal. I listened to that voicemail one more time last night. My 2009 voice, telling myself about a dentist appointment. 2 sentences. Maybe 3. But I listened to the texture of it this time, not what it was saying. Just the sound of it, the way it moved through a room, the weight it had. And I thought, there she is. There's Ruth. She was always in there. She just couldn't always get out. It made me sad, but a quieter kind of sad than I expected. More like recognition than grief. Because she did get out, eventually. Later than she should have. but she got out. I am here, talking into this recorder, saying things I mean, not worrying overmuch about whether they make me sound foolish or self-indulgent or too much. I have, at 81, arrived somewhere I wish I had reached much sooner. But I arrived, and there's something in that. I don't want to make it into more than it is. I haven't transformed into some other person. I'm still Ruth. I still sometimes say I'm fine when I'm not. I still sometimes hold things back out of old habit, the way you'll always favor the leg that once broke, even after it's healed. Old patterns don't vanish. They just loosen, a little, if you're lucky. But I notice it now. When I go quiet in a way that isn't right. When I'm about to say the easy thing instead of the honest thing. I notice it, and sometimes that's enough to change it, and sometimes it isn't. But at least I know what's happening. That feels like something worth having, even this late. Nora asked me, at the end of that long afternoon, if I thought it was too late to change. I told her I thought too late was a thing we often reach for because it's easier than trying. Not always. There are real limitations that come with time and age and the particular shapes our lives have taken. I can't go back to 1983. Thomas is gone. Gerald is gone. There are conversations that simply cannot be had now because the other person isn't here anymore to have them. Those are real losses. I don't minimize them. But within what remains, within whatever time is still ahead, I don't think it's ever too late to say something true, to let yourself be known, even a little. To stop performing satisfaction you don't feel. To let your voice take up the space it deserves. I'm not saying that as advice. I'm saying it because it's what I've found, here at the end of things, sitting in this chair with the curtains open. My voice is still mine, even now, even changed by age and grief and decades of underuse. It's still mine. And when I use it, honestly, when I let it say what it actually means, something settles in me that I can only describe as right, like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. I should have opened it sooner, but it's open now. I don't know how many more mornings I'll watch the sky change outside these curtains. I don't say that dramatically. It's just the reality of being 81 and knowing what I know. But I'm glad Nora asked her question. I'm glad I told her the truth. I'm glad she set up this recorder and told me to say what I wanted to say. I'm glad I said it. If you've listened this far, you've given me something I don't take lightly. Just the quiet company of it, of not being alone with these thoughts for a little while. If any of this has stirred something in you, some memory, some feeling, something you've been meaning to say to someone, or to yourself, I'd be glad to know. You can leave it below if you'd like. Not for me to respond to, necessarily. Just because sometimes it helps to say a thing out loud, even to strangers.